The screen fades into a busy hospital lobby. A young, exhausted nurse grips her stomach, tears streaming down her face. Her name, Sierra Vance. She's just discovered she's pregnant, and her husband, he isn't really her husband. He's a billionaire playboy who used her like a game. And now she's alone, terrified, and humiliated in front of everyone. But then a powerful man steps forward, calm, cold, and commanding. He looks at her and says words that will change her life forever. She is my wife now. In that moment, everything she thought she knew about love, betrayal, and power is about to shatter. And the fight for her life, her dignity, and her unborn child has only just begun. Welcome to the Mr. James Family Channel. We're about to dive into a story full of twists, heartbreak, and surprises. But first, smash that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Sierra Vance was midway through recalculating a chemotherapy drip rate when the alarms cut through the oncology ward's steady rhythm. Not the shrill, catastrophic kind that meant cardiac arrest. These were sharper, controlled, fast. The sound of incoming trouble. Stretchers rattled somewhere down the corridor. Shoes slapped tile in quick succession. A trauma pager chirped twice at her waist before going silent again. She exhaled slowly, capped the IV port, and slid the chart back into its holder. Another night shift. Another crisis. Families whispered prayers near curtains. A television murmured in one corner. A man 2 beds down groaned as medication finally dulled his pain. The smell of disinfectant hung in the air, mixed with coffee that had burned too long on a warming plate, and the faint metallic tang that hospitals never fully erased. Sierra rolled her shoulders once, easing the stiffness from 12 straight hours on her feet, and turned toward the emergency bay doors. They burst open. A gurney flew in first, pushed by 2 paramedics and a respiratory tech IV pole wobbling dangerously as it clipped the edge of a doorway. Male 32, minor head injury. 1 paramedic called out while steering. Single, car accident. Luxury vehicle. Driver insists on walking. Sierra moved automatically, stepping forward with practiced efficiency. She grabbed gloves from the wall dispenser, snapped them on, and reached for the portable vitals monitor. "Sir, I'm Nurse Vance. I'm going to check your—" She stopped, her eyes lifted, and for half a second, the hospital disappeared. The man on the gurney didn't look like someone who had just wrapped a car around a barrier at high speed. His suit was charcoal, gray and perfectly tailored, pressed so sharply it caught the fluorescent lights along its seams. A gold watch peeked from beneath his cuff, unscuffed. Diamond-studded cufflinks glinted as he shifted his wrist, bored rather than injured. There was a faint smear of blood at his hairline, small enough that it looked almost decorative instead of alarming. What made Sierra pause, though, were his eyes. Bright blue, unnaturally clear, the kind that belonged on billboards or magazine covers, not under trauma bay lighting. He was smiling. Not the nervous, shaken smile of someone relieved to be alive. The relaxed, proprietary smile of a man who assumed rooms rearranged themselves to suit him. Sterling Whitmore Ithuru. His name arrived in her mind a half second after she recognized the face. The Whitmores were hospital donors, political contributors, owners of half the skyline downtown. He had been on screens before. Charity galas, society pages. A billionaire hair photographed with actresses whose names never lasted longer than a week. Sterling shifted his gaze until it landed squarely on her. The smile widened. "Well," he drawled, voice smooth as poured whiskey. "Guess I found the pretty nurse." A couple of interns glanced at each other. Sierra blinked once and forced her brain back into professional channels. "Sir, please lie back," she said evenly, reaching for the blood pressure cuff. He did not. Instead, he pushed himself up on one elbow with careless ease, as though the gurney were a chaise lounge at a private club. "I'm fine," he replied, studying her face in a way that felt less medical and more evaluative. "Honestly, this whole thing is being blown out of proportion." She kept her hand steady, clipped the cuff around his arm anyway. "Humor us," she said. "Head injuries don't always hurt right away." Sterling's gaze drifted to her name badge. He leaned closer to read it. "Sierra Vance," he said slowly, savoring each syllable. "That sounds expensive." The words were light. The tone was not. She did not smile. She tightened the cuff and started the reading. Behind her, she heard a quiet snort. Leela. Of course it was Leela. Her best friend had been stationed at the adjacent bay, prepping supplies, pretending not to watch while absolutely watching everything. "Oh no," Leela murmured under her breath. "That one thinks he owns oxygen." Sierra felt heat flicker behind her ears. Sterling heard. He tipped his head back and laughed, deep and amused, as though he had just been complimented. "I do breathe premium air," he said pleasantly. "Occupational hazard." Sierra met his eyes for exactly 1 second longer than necessary. "Blood pressure is elevated," she said. "Pulse is irregular." "Is that bad?" he asked. "It means you need to stay still." He lifted an eyebrow. "Oh!" That earned another smile, different this time. "Sharper, feisty," he murmured. "I like that." She ignored the comment and moved to inspect the cut at his hairline. It was superficial, a few stitches at most. No swelling yet, though she made a mental note to keep watching for it. Any nausea, dizziness, vision changes, nope, loss of consciousness, not unless boredom counts. She resisted the urge to sigh. "How fast were you driving?" Sterling shrugged, unconcerned. "Fast enough to be late to something important." What was that? He studied her again before answering. "Dinner?" Leela snorted outright this time. Sierra shot her a look. Sterling's lips twitched. "Your friend seems charming." "She saves lives," Sierra said flatly. "That tends to make people honest. I like honest." She doubted that. A tech approached with a tablet. "CT is clear so far. We'll run labs." Sterling waved a hand. "See? Perfectly fine. You clipped a concrete divider at 60 miles an hour, the paramedic said. "That's not fine. I clipped it with the corner." Sterling corrected. "The car did most of the suffering." Sierra glanced at the damage report scrolling on the tablet. Totaled. The car had folded like paper. She looked back at him. "You're lucky." Sterling smiled as though luck followed him, around like a personal assistant. "I usually am." They wheeled him in a curtained bay for observation. Sierra followed. Checking the IV site the paramedics had started, confirming dosage protocols. keeping her hands busy so she did not think about the way his eyes tracked her movement with open curiosity, not admiration. Assessment. The kind people did when browsing something they intended to purchase. She hated that feeling. "Do you flirt with everyone who patches you up?" she asked without looking at him. "Only the memorable ones." She met his gaze again despite herself. "And what makes someone memorable?" Sterling's eyes flicked to her hands, gloved and steady, then back to her face. "They don't pretend they're invisible." Sierra stiffened slightly. She had spent years learning how to fade when needed, how to move through rooms without being noticed, so patience took center stage. How to make herself small when donors strutted through halls and executives talked over nurses like furniture. Sterling had clocked that in less than 5 minutes. She did not like that at all. "You'll be here for observation for at least 4 hours, she said, snapping her pen onto the chart. No driving, no leaving, no charming staff into breaking protocol. He smiled lazily. "What about charming you?" She did not answer. Instead, she stepped out to update his chart at the nurse's station. She could feel him watching her through the gap in the curtain. Leela slid up beside her, lowering her voice. "Please tell me he's not hitting on you." Sierra didn't look up from the computer. "He's breathing." That wasn't the question. "Yes," Sierra admitted. Leela grimaced. "Of course he is. The expensive ones always do that thing with their eyebrows." "What thing?" "That thing that says they think you're part of the experience." Sierra pressed enter, a little harder than necessary. "I'm not." Leela smiled faintly. "Because that man has bad idea, written in invisible ink." Sierra nodded. She should have listened to that instinct more closely. When she glanced back toward the bay, Sterling had pulled the curtain open just enough to make eye contact with her again. He raised 2 fingers in a mock salute. She turned away, focused on her screen, told herself he was just another patient, another ego, another man who would leave by morning and become nothing more than a line item in a chart. But when she caught her reflection in the darkened monitor, she realized something unsettled her. That smile. It wasn't flirtation. It was recognition. Like he had just spotted something rare and decided to see how close he could get. From behind the curtain, Sterling watched Sierra walk away, eyes narrowing slightly as his grin shifted into something quieter and far more deliberate, already planning what exactly he would do to make sure Nurse Sierra Vance did not forget him when his 4 hours were up. Sterling did not stop watching when Sierra disappeared into the corridor. He leaned back against the raised bed, fingers steepled loosely at his chest, eyes following the faint silhouette of her moving past glass partitions and swinging doors. The monitors beeped steadily beside him, unimpressed by wealth, charm, or intention. A nurse he did not recognize stepped in to adjust the IV flow. Sterling smiled at her out of habit. She ignored him completely. That amused him more than it should have. Most people noticed him. Most people bent a little, changed their posture, softened their tone, asked questions that were not medical. Sierra had done none of that. She had tightened a blood pressure cuff, like she was securing a seatbelt. Efficient, sharp, controlled. And yet something about the way she had paused when she first saw him had stayed with him. Not awe, not greed, calculation. As though she had measured him and filed him under something dangerous. Sterling exhaled slowly. That more than anything made him curious. Sierra did not realize she was gripping her coffee cup too tightly until the lid bent under her fingers. She stood near the charting station, pretending to review lab values while her reflection stared back at her from the dark screen of an idle monitor. Her brows were drawn together in a way she usually reserved for dosage errors and critical scans. She did not like being watched, especially not by men who looked at hospitals like luxury lounges. Leela brushed past her with a clipboard. You keep glancing at Trauma Bay for like it owes you money. I am not. You absolutely are. Sierra sighed quietly. He is intense. That is not the word I would pick. What word would you pick? Leela leaned closer. Predatory. Adjacent. Sierra snorted despite herself. He is just a donor's son. He is a billionaire donor's son, Leela corrected. That is a whole different species. Sierra straightened. Which means he gets the same care as everyone else. Leela tilted her head. You say that like you are convincing yourself. Sierra did not answer. A second later, her pager buzzed. Room update. Trauma Bay 4. She closed her eyes for one brief, silent count and headed back. Sterling brightened when she reappeared, like a child spotting a favorite teacher. Miss me already? She pulled gloves on without responding. I am here to check your neuro status. I feel perfectly neurological. That is not a word. It should be. She leaned in to shine a penlight into his pupils. He held still this time. Follow my finger. He did. Only the kind I get when people underestimate me. That is not a symptom. He smiled again. You are very serious. I work in oncology. His gaze softened a fraction. That would do it. The comment surprised her. Most people avoided acknowledging that wing entirely. She straightened. You will be moved to observation shortly. Does that mean I lose you? You will get another nurse. He frowned slightly. I prefer you. That is unfortunate. Sterling laughed quietly. For who? For you. She stepped out before he could respond. 3 hours later, Sierra clocked out with aching feet and a tension headache blooming behind her eyes. The night had swallowed the city beyond the windows. Rain streaked down glass panels in crooked lines, blurring street lights into pale halos. She tugged her jacket on, waved to Leela, and headed toward the staff exit. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Hope you made it home safe. She stopped walking, typed. Who is this? The reply came immediately. Your least injured patient. She stared at the screen, then typed back. How did you get my number? Asked the unit clerk nicely. She grimaced. Do not text me. That sounded less convincing than you think. She shoved the phone into her pocket and kept walking. The next morning, Sierra arrived to chaos. Not medical chaos, floral chaos. The nurse's station had vanished beneath towering arrangements of white orchids, lilies, and roses in glass vases tall enough to block sightlines. Ribbons curled over keyboards. Petals drifted across countertops like snow. A delivery man hovered nervously while Leela stood frozen in the center of it all. What? Sierra said slowly. is happening. Leela turned. Either someone died fabulously or someone is being stalked with money. Sierra's stomach sank. She spotted the card first. Cream paper. Embossed gold letters. For the woman who kept me from boredom, SW. She closed her eyes. Tell me he is not serious. Oh, he is extremely serious, Leela said. And facilities is furious because one of the vases is blocking the emergency phone. Sierra exhaled through her nose. I tried. What do you mean you tried? The delivery man raised a hand weakly. The sender prepaid for 12 hours. And there are more in the truck. Sierra blinked. More. He nodded. In the truck. She stared at the ceiling for patience. Put them in the lobby. They already overflowed. Sierra muttered something that was not in the employee handbook. Her phone buzzed again. Did they arrive? She did not reply. Too much, she typed. Remove them. I donated to pediatric oncology. Her fingers froze. She turned slowly. Leela's eyes widened. He donated. Sierra closed her eyes. How much? Leela checked her tablet. Enough that administration personally approved the flowers. Sierra whispered. I hate that. Leela whispered back. Same. Sterling appeared before noon. Not in a patient gown. In a navy suit sharp enough to cut glass. He walked into the nurse's station like he owned square footage. Good morning, Sierra. Her jaw tightened. You are discharged. Technically. You should not be here. I brought lunch. He gestured. Catering trays followed him in. Leela mouthed, oh my God. I did not ask for this? I know. Then why? Sterling's smile faded just enough to feel intentional. Because you look tired. Sierra hesitated. She hated that he was right. I am not interested. People say that when they are. I say it when I mean it. He studied her for a moment longer than polite. Then nodded. Right. She blinked. That is it. For now. She crossed her arms. Do not donate to get access to me. I donate because I can, he said calmly. Access is separate. That is not reassuring. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. You should be. Her spine stiffened. Why? Because I am not used to being told no. She met his gaze. Jet used to it. Something flickered behind his eyes. Interest sharpened into something colder. He smiled anyway. I think I will. From the corridor, Sierra watched Sterling walk away with unhurried confidence, unaware that tucked inside the donation file now sitting on the administrator's desk was a second folder. One marked with her name in neat black print, requested personally by Sterling Whitmore, before he ever left the hospital. Sierra Vance shifted her weight on the marble, trying not to think about how painfully cold the floor was beneath her bare feet. The chill traveled up her ankles and legs, but she forced herself to stay focused. Every sense in her body screamed luxury, power, and intention. The kind of scene movies painted with filtered light and music that made hearts race for the wrong reasons. Sterling's estate was everything she hadn't asked for, but everything that demanded attention. Crystals reflected chandeliers like tiny stars. Waiters glided past with silver trays, their movements precise, rehearsed. Outside, fountains hissed softly, keeping rhythm with the string quartet playing somewhere inside the grand hall. A man in a flowing robe, more ceremonial than religious, spoke in a voice meant to echo through this polished hall. Words about destiny, promises, alignment of souls. Sierra tuned out most of them, but she felt the weight of the moment pressing against her chest. Her pulse jumped with anticipation and caution, two emotions fighting for dominance in her body. Sterling stepped forward, elegant and composed, slipping a diamond ring onto her finger. The metal bit into her skin slightly, a reminder that beauty and comfort came at the cost of pain. He leaned closer, speaking softly, temporary. Legal part waits till my merger clears. His words were casual, but they dripped with authority. He had rehearsed them. They were meant to persuade, to lull. Sierra hesitated, a flicker of unease creeping through her chest. Her instincts, honed from years in high-pressure medical situations, whispered questions she didn't dare voice. "You trust me, right?" Sterling asked, his eyes holding hers with that unnerving intensity. She did. She trusted him because he had spoken about children, as if they were already part of their future. She trusted him because he had sent anonymous donations to cancer patients, making her feel, however briefly, that he cared about things beyond himself. She trusted him because he had brushed her hair back from her forehead one night, when she had nodded off at a chart, falling asleep in the quiet hum of the oncology wing. That small act had felt like genuine kindness. Sierra's vision blurred for a moment with all the lights, music, and expectations. She did not notice the driver standing stiffly behind the officiant, hands clasped, watching silently. Nor did she register the thin folder placed carefully on a side table, marked with her name in neat black print. When Sterling spoke again, her focus returned to his voice, smooth as silk. The man in the robe continued reciting phrases, invoking luck and blessings, prosperity and harmony. She nodded politely, a small, automatic gesture. Sterling's hand rested lightly on hers as the words washed over her. "You'll be fine," he murmured, his breath brushing her ear. "Everything is in place." She took a breath, inhaling the scent of fresh flowers, polished wood, and that faint, infuriatingly expensive cologne he always seemed to wear. She glanced down at her hand. The ring caught the light, reflecting in sharp shards across the marble. It was beautiful, dangerous, perfect. A waiter passed, bowing slightly, offering a champagne flute to Sterling. He shook his head, and the tray moved on. A faint ripple of envy passed through the crowd of onlookers, friends, family, distant acquaintances, all of them watching. They thought they were here for a wedding. Sierra tried not to think about how every single person in the room was paying attention, judging, waiting for something to go wrong. She remembered the small gestures Sterling had made over the past months. Quiet conversations, carefully orchestrated kindness, moments that felt intimate, even when they were public. He had built this scene for her in ways subtle and grand, coaxing her into believing something real. Sierra exhaled slowly. She trusted him. She believed in the ceremony, if not the paperwork. The officiant raised his hands, signaling the final words. Sterling's eyes found hers again, and he smiled. It was warm, disarming, just enough to make her relax. "You're incredible," he said softly. "And today, you are mine." Sierra's lips curved into the tiniest smile, heart fluttering with a mixture of excitement and nerves. She imagined a life beyond long hospital nights, beyond the endless calls and bleeps of the ward. A life with him. Possibly, if she allowed herself to believe in it. Her attention snapped back to the folder beside the efficient. The official-looking documents glimmered in the light. She assumed it contained the legal paperwork confirming their marriage. Sterling had mentioned it before, how the legal details would wait until his merger finalized. She had no reason to doubt him. As the ceremony drew to its orchestrated close, Sterling took her hand, guiding her toward the cameras positioned subtly around the hall. He kissed her hand lightly, a gesture meant to convey devotion and tenderness. She let herself lean into it, for just a moment, feeling a warmth she hadn't allowed herself to feel in months. The orchestra's final notes lingered in the air. Guests clapped, some cheerfully, others out of obligation. Sterling's smile remained fixed on her face, one hand holding hers, the other resting casually at his side. He whispered something, low enough that only she could hear. "I've been waiting for this moment." Sierra's heart swelled. Despite the nagging voice at the edge of her mind, she allowed herself a single, small bubble of hope. Maybe this man, with all his wealth, charm, and dangerous edge, could be something real. Maybe this moment wasn't entirely a lie. Yet, as her gaze swept the room, she didn't notice a subtle movement behind the officiant. A shadow flickered at the edge of her vision. The driver who had ferried Sterling to the hospital months ago, now standing rigidly, expressionless. His presence was unremarkable, meant to blend into the background. No one paid attention, and Sierra didn't even see him. Nor did she notice the thin black folder, perfectly aligned with the edge of the table. It had her name printed on it in neat letters, but the contents were not what she expected. Inside was no legal marriage certificate, not even a preliminary contract, just a series of documents that could later be construed to protect someone else, Sterling himself. Her mind, wrapped up in the music, the flowers, and Sterling's words, didn't process the subtle misalignment of trust and reality. She didn't see the small smirk that crossed the driver's lips when no one was watching. Nor did she notice how Sterling's hand lingered on hers, with a faint tension behind the gesture, a control hidden beneath charm. The ceremony ended. Guests murmured congratulations. Champagne glasses clinked. Photographers moved quickly, capturing each smile, each kiss, each staged moment. Sierra felt herself being swept along, carried by the current of expectation, luxury, and desire. She allowed herself to believe it was real as she moved towards Sterling for the post-ceremony photos. A small, deliberate movement caught her eye. A shadow retreating near the doorway. It made no sense. She shook her head, dismissing it. Perhaps fatigue. Perhaps nerves. Perhaps nothing. She smiled at Sterling, fingers intertwined. The ring sparkled on her hand, a symbol of promise, beauty, and commitment. And yet, somewhere in the polished hall, under layers of crystal chandeliers and soft violins, The thin folder waited. Its contents would change everything. Sierra smiled for the cameras, unaware that behind the efficient Sterling's driver quietly slipped the folder into his coat, its legal implications hidden, ready to turn her dreams of trust and love into a dangerous trap she could never have anticipated. The morning light crept through the blinds, thin lines cutting across the beige tiles of Sierra's apartment. She sat on the cool bathroom floor, knees drawn to her chest, the faint metallic scent of the sink mingling with the lingering aroma of last night's coffee. The nausea hadn't stopped, not entirely, but it had slowed long enough for her to breathe. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for the small white stick, the one that could change everything. She had already done this twice before, but this time the anticipation clung to her like a second skin. One line, two lines, bright pink, impossible to ignore. Her stomach, already roiling from fatigue and morning sickness, twisted with an entirely different kind of emotion. Fear, hope, joy, anger. She couldn't untangle them. Sierra exhaled shakily, trying to focus, to steady herself against the dizzying weight of reality pressing down on her chest. This wasn't a hypothetical. This wasn't a calculation. This was life, real and undeniable, moving through her, changing her. She held the test a little closer, as if proximity could make the future clearer, as if looking harder could make the fear vanish. Then her phone buzzed. She froze. Sterling's name flashed across the screen, even though she hadn't called him. His phone, left charging, as he often did when overseas, was hers to check. A guilty glance confirmed the temptation. She hadn't meant to read it. She only wanted to make sure nothing urgent had happened while he was gone. The first preview popped up. Model party confirmed. Yacht is ready. Her heart skipped. She didn't need to read further, but she did. Which fiancé tonight? The words hit her harder than a physical blow. She could feel the floor beneath her, the tiles cold, grounding her in reality, and yet the room tilted slightly, unsteady. Her breath caught, sharp and irregular, as the phone slipped slightly from her sweaty palm. Scrolling faster, her pulse pounding, Sierra found more messages, laughing emojis, blurry photos she wasn't part of, plans she had never agreed to, promises he had never made. No mention of marriage. No acknowledgement of her. A hollow ache spread through her chest, stretching to her stomach, tightening her already nauseated muscles. The pink lines she had thought were symbols of life and love suddenly felt like markers of betrayal. Her hands shook violently, and the phone slipped entirely, landing on the floor with a sharp tap that echoed too loudly in the small bathroom. Sierra's vision blurred, tears brimming as shock, anger, and heartbreak collided. She wanted to scream, to throw something, to wake the world from the nightmare she hadn't realized was unfolding. Instead, she stayed still, holding the test, staring at the lines that mocked her with quiet, steady certainty. The evidence of her pregnancy, of life growing inside her, clashed violently with the evidence of Sterling's duplicity. Her mind raced, trying to find logic in the chaos. Could this be a misunderstanding? Maybe there's an explanation. Maybe he didn't mean it. She whispered the words aloud, but they sounded hollow. Even her voice betrayed her uncertainty. Images of the yacht, the parties, the fiancés flickered across her mind. She remembered the polished estate, the staged wedding ceremony, the diamonds, the carefully choreographed smiles. Had any of it been real? Or had she simply been a pawn in a game she didn't even know she was playing? Her fingers clenched the test, white-knuckled. She wanted to call someone, anyone, to tell them she needed help, to tell them the man she thought she knew had been lying. But the thought of explaining, of having to articulate betrayal with concrete evidence, paralyzed her. Who would understand? Who would believe? She pressed herself against the wall, sliding down slowly until her head rested against the tiles. The room spun slightly, the shadows cast by the blinds stretching across her in cruel, sharp lines. Every sound, the distant hum of the refrigerator, the faint cars outside, the soft drip of the faucet, seemed amplified, emphasizing her isolation. Somewhere in the back of her mind, a tiny spark of defiance stirred. I can't let him do this. I can't let him take everything from me. She closed her eyes, inhaling sharply, trying to center herself. But the phone buzzed again. Another message. She didn't pick it up. She couldn't. And she didn't want to know. Not yet. Not until she could figure out how to survive the betrayal, the shock, the reality of being pregnant alone. Images of Sterling's smile, the effortless charm, the way he had made her believe he cared, it all twisted in her mind, sharp and cutting. The contrast of what she thought she knew and the truth she now faced threatened to undo her completely. Leela's words echoed in her memory. The expensive ones always know how to make you forget caution. Watch your heart. Sierra had laughed then, thinking it was exaggeration. Now, every syllable seemed prophetic. Her phone buzzed again, but she ignored it. She didn't want to read the words. She didn't want to see the evidence of his duplicity. Her gaze shifted to the bathroom mirror, reflecting a pale, tear-streaked face that looked smaller somehow, vulnerable in ways she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. She sank deeper against the wall, pressing her hand to her stomach, feeling the tiny flutter of life inside her, fragile and insistent. I will protect you, she whispered, even if I have to stand alone. The thought steadied her. If only slightly. She let herself sit like that for long moments, just breathing, just being aware of the life inside her. The world outside, the lies, the betrayals, the wealth and privilege she had assumed she could trust, seemed distant, muted. Then she heard it. A sound from her apartment door. The soft click of a lock disengaging. Footsteps approaching. Her pulse quickened. Every instinct screamed that something was about to happen, that the fragile quiet of the room would shatter, that nothing would ever be the same. Sierra's eyes widened as the shadow of someone entering fell across the floor. She could see the outline of Sterling's figure, his presence undeniable, and for the first time, she realized that the storm she had been trying to outrun, had just walked back into her home. Sterling Whitmore Athern walked into the hospital like he owned it. The scent of expensive cologne clung to him, mingling strangely with the faint fizz of champagne on his cuffs. His shoes clicked on the marble floors, announcing his presence before anyone even noticed. Sierra's pulse picked up instantly, not from admiration, not from fear exactly, but from that old, sharp stab of disbelief that had never left her since she realized he had been playing her. She didn't plan to confront him here, in the hospital where her life was built on saving others and keeping herself in control. But the moment he stepped into the lobby, she felt something fracture inside her, something that had been holding her patience in place. Fear didn't make plans. Anger didn't either. It simply demanded action. She approached him, every step measured, though her hands shook at her sides. The sterile smell of the lobby, the distant murmur of nurses, the beeping of monitors at a nearby station. None of it mattered. He was here. And she had to speak before the words twisted inside her throat into poison. "You lied," she said, voice quivering as she clenched her fists, nails biting into her palms. "The wedding." Sterling blinked at her, a slow, almost amused motion. His expression relaxed. Then, before she could continue, he chuckled, a sound rich and casual, completely untethered from the storm raging in her chest. "Oh, that," he said lightly, as if the world could simply bend around his whims. People nearby slowed their steps, glanced curiously. A few nurses paused mid-task, sensing tension. "I paid the guy," Sterling added casually, almost lazily, as if discussing the weather. "You didn't think that was real, did you?" Her stomach dropped, twisting with nausea and fury. "I'm pregnant," she whispered, the words sharp as knives against the hollow calm of the lobby. Sterling's eyes widened fractionally. Then, after a beat, he sighed. Not panic, not regret. Just a sigh, as if he had been handed an unexpected puzzle piece in a game he had intended to play casually. "That complicates things," he said softly, sliding an envelope into her pocket with deliberate nonchalance. "Cash." Sierra's hands went to the envelope automatically, trembling. Her stomach felt as though it had been ripped out of her body. "You think money can fix this?" She spat, barely able to form the words through the shock, fear, and growing fury. "You're smart," Sterling said, leaning just slightly closer, his lips almost brushing her ear. "Fix it?" Her knees weakened. She staggered back, trying to swallow a scream, trying to steady herself, trying to keep some semblance of dignity. "I loved you," she said, tears slipping down her cheeks, burning. Her voice cracked, raw, desperate. The kind of emotion that doesn't care about appearances, that strips away everything polished and professional. Sterling tilted his head, blue eyes calm and unreadable. "You loved the version I rented you," he said. Each word calculated, cruel, precise. Her legs gave out beneath her. Sierra collapsed, barely missing a marble column. Hitting the floor with a soft thud, the lobby erupted around her. People gasped. A nurse dropped a clipboard. A doctor muttered, Call security. Someone else fumbled with a wheelchair. Phones came out. Eyebrows rose. Murmurs spread. Her heart raced not just from the fall, but from the total humiliation, exposure, betrayal. Sterling's hand rested lightly on her shoulder, not to help her, but to steady himself as he surveyed the chaos he had caused. The calm in his face contrasted violently with the storm of whispers, stares, and confusion around them. Sierra pressed herself against the cool marble floor, hands covering her face, shivering. She could feel every heartbeat in her chest, each one echoing Sterling's betrayal. She could hear snippets of what people were saying. Pregnant. He's serious. The millionaire, Whitmore. Their voices collided with her own thoughts. Leela's figure appeared suddenly from the crowd, eyes wide, rushing toward her.
Sierra!
"Are you okay?" she yelled, cutting through the murmur of gossip. Her hands shook as she reached down to steady Sierra's shoulders. Sierra stammered, trying to find words, but none came. Her fingers trembled around the envelope, the small proof of her child, the tangible evidence of Sterling's selfishness and manipulation. Sterling, standing a few feet away, watched with that same unreadable expression, calm, collected, untouched, as though the world and the people in it were mere extras in his carefully scripted life. A doctor approached, frowning, gesturing toward her on the floor. "Mum, you need to sit up. Are you injured?" Sierra's eyes fluttered open, the harsh glow of fluorescent lights cutting through the fog of shock that clouded her mind. She felt the cold sweep of tile against her legs as she slowly became aware of the hospital lobby around her. The murmurs, the blurred faces, the weight of every eye that had been watching her just moments ago. Her hands instinctively went to her belly, cradling the tiny life growing inside her. Leela crouched beside her, tears streaking her cheeks, hands gripping Sierra's arms as if sheer force could anchor her friend to the present. "Sierra, you're okay," she whispered, voice trembling. "You're okay." But the shakiness betrayed her own fear. A man stepped forward, precise and rigid in a grey, tailored suit that seemed designed to command attention. His shoes clicked softly on the marble, echoing with an authority that made Sierra flinch. "Ems Vance," he said crisply, voice sharp as steel. "Sign these non-disclosure documents." Sierra blinked, trying to focus through the haze of nausea. Shock and disbelief. The pen he offered seemed too heavy in her trembling hand. What?" she stammered. "They'll protect Mr. Whitmore," he said smoothly, not waiting for her to respond. His tone was polite, but each syllable pressed down with the weight of control. "From what?" Her voice was barely more than a whisper, her stomach knotting tighter with every heartbeat. "From everything," he replied, the words deliberately vague. Like a shadow hiding a blade, Sierra stared down at the pen he had placed in her hand. Her fingers shook violently, gripping it as if it were a lifeline, as if the act of signing could somehow stabilize the chaos surrounding her. She could feel the life in her belly flutter faintly, a fragile pulse of hope and vulnerability. a reminder of what mattered. From across the lobby, Sterling leaned against a polished marble column, arms crossed casually. His eyes never left her, calm, imperturbable, waiting. He looked like he had done this 1,000 times before, and yet every ounce of confidence radiated from him like heat. Sierra's lips parted slightly, and she inhaled a shaky breath. The pen hovered over the paper, poised between submission and defiance. Every instinct screamed for her to drop it, to refuse, to make a stand for herself and the life inside her. But fear weighed heavily against her courage. Hospital cameras blinked silently in corners above, recording every moment. The man in gray's voice was smooth but firm. "Let's keep this quiet. Sign now, and no one outside these walls needs to know about today." Leela's hand squeezed hers. "Sierra, you don't have to do this," she said, voice trembling with both worry and outrage. Sterling's smirk flickered as he watched, amusement flashing faintly across his face. The power he wielded was intoxicating, dangerous, and terrifying. Every person in the lobby sensed the tension radiating from him and Sierra. Sierra's eyes scanned the papers. The legal jargon blurred together, clauses, indemnities, non-specific obligations, loopholes crafted to protect one person, and one person only. Her mind raced to comprehend the magnitude of what was being asked. To sign meant surrender. To sign meant silence. To sign meant letting Sterling erase every shred of the truth from history. Her heartbeat thundered in her chest. She pressed a hand to her mouth, trying to stop the tremors that were shaking her body, trying to steady herself for what she knew could come next. "You don't have to sign this," Leela whispered again, urgency creeping into her tone. She glanced around, noting the small, hesitant gathering of hospital staff who had lingered, unsure of how to intervene without crossing professional boundaries. Sterling shifted slightly, hands still crossed, watching with that calculated calm that made her blood boil. His presence was a tether of control, reminding her that he thrived in moments like this, that he had orchestrated every detail to see her falter. Sierra inhaled sharply, the flutter in her belly growing louder in her awareness. "This is not just about me. This is about the life I'm carrying." She thought about the months of care, the late nights in the oncology ward, the patients she had saved, the life she had always fought to protect. And now, standing here, she realized that she couldn't allow someone else, someone like Sterling, to write the rules. The man in grey leaned closer, the pen pressing lightly against her fingers, urging her compliance. "This is in your best interest," he said, voice low but firm. "And his?" Her stomach churned violently. Her hands trembled as she let go of the pen, pushing it away from the paper. Silence filled the lobby. Even Sterling blinked, surprised at the defiance, though only for a moment. "You're mistaken," she said, voice trembling yet steady enough to carry across the space. This is not in my interest. Or anyone's. I will not sign it." Sterling's lips curved into the faintest, sharpest smirk, the kind that didn't promise kindness but challenge. "Bulled," he said softly. his voice carrying just enough to make the statement sting. The lobby seemed to constrict around them. Conversations ceased. Cameras continued to hum silently. Staff members exchanged glances, some impressed, some terrified. The tension was palpable. The man in gray's jaw tightened. He adjusted his stance, clearly weighing his options. Ms. Vance, you may not understand the ramifications. But this can escalate quickly, he said. His tone was no longer casual. There was threat hidden beneath the politeness, a warning cloaked in legalese. Sierra's mind raced. I won't be silenced. I won't let him win. She glanced down at her belly again, hand resting protectively, and felt the life inside respond with a subtle kick, as if reinforcing her resolve. You're not the only one with leverage here, she whispered, almost to herself, almost as if saying it aloud would summon courage. Sterling's eyes narrowed, the flicker of control momentarily shaken. He straightened slightly, sensing that the game had shifted. Leela whispered, Sierra, you've got to get out of here before. Before what? The words hung in the air, unspoken, leaving a tension so thick it seemed to press against their chests. Sierra rose slowly from the stretcher, gripping the edge for support, every movement deliberate. She looked Sterling straight in the eye, every ounce of fear and defiance coiled tightly together. The man in grey, realizing the stalemate, took a half step back, hand resting lightly on the folder of papers. He seemed aware that whatever happened next could unravel the careful orchestration Sterling had put in place. The crowd in the lobby watched, silent but alert, sensing that a confrontation far larger than any personal quarrel was about to erupt. Sterling's gaze hardened. His calm, collected exterior threatened to crack under the weight of Sierra's sudden audacity. Sierra inhaled deeply, feeling the flutter of life in her belly as a grounding pulse. She whispered softly, yet firmly, I won't let you control me or him, or us. Sterling's lips twitched, a dangerous mixture of surprise and amusement flickering across his face. Before Sierra could take another step, the lobby doors swung open and a tall, imposing figure entered, a lawyer and enforcer with ties to Sterling's family, whose presence promised to escalate the battle to a level Sierra had never anticipated, forcing her to confront a truth far bigger than herself. I'm fine, Sierra whispered, though the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. The physical collapse didn't compare to the emotional devastation, the betrayal, the cruel slap of reality. The envelope in her pocket felt heavier than any weight she had ever carried. Money couldn't buy back trust, couldn't heal what had just been broken. And yet, here it was, a stark, cold reminder that Sterling believed everything, every future choice, could be bought, manipulated, rented, or discarded. Sierra's gaze flicked toward him, narrowing. Her fingers itched to crush the envelope, to throw it at his feet, to scream at him until he understood the gravity of what he had done. Instead, she stayed still, heart hammering, breaths ragged, shivering on the marble, watching him. The lobby had gone silent in parts, people frozen between shock and disbelief. Security appeared, moving cautiously, unsure of how to approach a billionaire in the center of a human disaster. Sterling's eyes met hers, and for the briefest second, there was a flicker, something human, almost imperceptible. Then it vanished, replaced by the mask he wore so well: charm, control, arrogance. Sierra's mind raced. I can't let him win. I can't let this go unnoticed. I have to fight. But the thought collided violently with her exhaustion, her nausea, and the fragile new life she carried inside her. The envelope in her pocket was a threat, a bribe, and a challenge all at once. She didn't yet know how she could turn it into leverage, but she knew instinctively that she had to. She had to survive this, protect her child, protect herself, and somehow extract justice from the man who had lied to her, manipulated her, and humiliated her in the most public, cruel way possible. Leela crouched beside her, whispering urgently, "Do you want me to?" "No," Sierra interrupted, cutting her off sharply, startling even herself. I need to think." Sterling remained still, a statue of privilege and control, his gaze never leaving her, almost daring her to act, almost daring her to show weakness. The lobby's chaos had quieted, but tension hung thick in the air, a mixture of fear, curiosity, and outrage. Every person there had witnessed betrayal played out live, and every eye was on her, waiting to see what she would do. Sierra pressed a hand to her stomach, feeling the small, undeniable life growing there. It was fragile, innocent, unaware of the corruption and lies surrounding it. She drew in a breath, steadying herself as she whispered to that life, "We'll survive this. We will." Her gaze lifted towards Sterling, and for the first time, a spark of defiance ignited. She wouldn't collapse again. Not like this, not publicly. She wouldn't allow him to dictate the narrative anymore. Sierra's trembling fingers brushed the envelope in her pocket as she stood, eyes blazing with quiet fury, unaware that Sterling had already called someone powerful to the hospital, someone whose presence would change everything. She thought she knew about the game. She was trapped in. The lobby seemed to freeze in the moment when the other hand closed over Sierra's trembling fingers. Large, warm, steady, unlike anything she had felt in hours, days, months, a grounding presence that cut through the panic and the betrayal. None. The word was calm, measured, but it carried a weight that made the air itself seem heavier. It wasn't a request. It wasn't a warning. It was a declaration. Sierra blinked, trying to focus through the tears, the nausea, the overwhelming mix of fear and relief. She looked up. The man standing over her was imposing, but not in the flashy way Sterling had been. There was no calculated charm, no arrogance, just control. Pure, quiet authority. Alistair Thorne, she breathed, recognition creeping in through the fog. The CEO of the entire hospital network. Feared, respected, and whispered about in corridors she had walked countless nights before, caring for patients while others slept. His eyes, dark and steady, met hers for a brief moment, a signal that everything was about to change. The lawyer stiffened, clearly caught off guard. His hands hovered unsure, the papers still clutched with a grip that had once seemed so certain.
Sir,
He started, voice brittle. The polite authority he wielded moments ago crumbling under Alistair's presence. Alistair's gaze didn't waver. He stepped closer, and with a swift motion, he seized the documents from Sierra's hands. The pen fell to the floor. He ripped the papers. One, twice. Fragments fluttered to the polished marble like fragile snow, scattering across the lobby floor in a chaotic confetti of deceit. Sterling's lips tightened, blue eyes narrowing with disbelief. He stepped forward, voice low, dangerous. "This doesn't concern you." Alistair finally turned to him, slow, deliberate, every movement radiating authority. "Everything that happens in my hospital concerns me." His tone was calm, but there was no mistaking the ice beneath the words. A shiver ran down the spines of those watching. Sierra's chest heaved. Relief and awe tangled with lingering anger. She had expected confrontation. But this was different. Alistair's presence didn't just stop the man who had humiliated her. It seemed to pause the world around them. Alistair's gaze softened as it returned to her. The hardness melted just enough to let her see a hint of warmth, a flicker of understanding. But then he shifted his attention back to Sterling. Every inch of him screamed control, danger, and uncompromising justice. "You humiliated the finest nurse in this building," he said evenly, voice resonating so clearly that murmurs quieted into stunned silence. Every person in the lobby froze, caught between curiosity, fear, and awe. "She isn't signing anything." Alistair continued, his words deliberate, precise. The gravity of the statement pressed down on the room like a physical weight. No arguments. No negotiation. No loopholes. Nothing Sterling could control. Then, with the finality of a verdict delivered, he said words that reverberated like thunder. "Because she is my wife now." The phrase hung in the air. Gasps rippled through the gathered crowd. Patients, staff, security, even Sterling's own lawyer. Whispers collided with stunned silence, forming an almost tangible tension in the space. Sterling's mouth opened, closed, then opened again, the wordless shock written across his sharp features. "What?" he managed, finally, voice cracking as the reality hit him in waves. Alistair didn't answer immediately. He stepped forward, sliding his coat over Sierra's shoulders, the action protective, definitive, almost like a shield from the chaos surrounding them. His eyes held hers for a heartbeat, longer than necessary, conveying calm reassurance. "Take her to private care." He instructed the staff nearby, each word clear, leaving no room for misunderstanding. His presence became a barrier around her, a fortress of authority. Sierra felt the weight of the moment press down on her in a different way than Sterling ever had. This wasn't about luxury or manipulation. It was about protection, about acknowledgement, about standing for what was right in a world that often rewarded cruelty and disregard. Security and staff moved swiftly, forming a careful perimeter around her as she allowed herself to be guided toward the private care wing. Her heart still raced from the confrontation. But, for the first time in months, a fragile sense of safety bloomed inside her. Sterling stood frozen, arms crossed, disbelief etched into every line of his body. The confidence, arrogance, and control he had wielded like a weapon moments ago evaporated under the gaze of someone who would not bend to him. Leela trailed behind Sierra, worry still in her eyes, but relief faintly softening the corners of her expression. The chaos in the lobby slowly dissolved into whispers and murmurs, the witnesses absorbing what they had just seen. A man finally met with a force greater than his own manipulation. Sierra's fingers rested on her belly instinctively, feeling the life within her pulse steadily. A tiny heartbeat reminding her that she was not alone. Every fragment of torn paper, every gaze, every gasp in the lobby reinforced that Sterling's control was ending. Alistair's hand remained near hers, just enough to be grounding, just enough to remind her she had an ally, a protector, someone who understood both her worth and her vulnerability. The law, the power, and the authority surrounding Alistair created a bubble of safety in a world that had, for far too long, thrived on injustice. He was calm, almost terrifyingly so. But she could feel the energy behind his presence, a promise that no harm would come to her under his watch. Sterling's jaw clenched, and he took a step forward, perhaps hoping to regain a fraction of control, but the mere glance from Alistair froze him mid-motion. Every muscle in his body seemed to tighten as if understanding that the game had changed irreversibly. Sierra inhaled slowly, allowing herself to feel the shift in power, the gravity of the moment. For months, she had been alone, manipulated, belittled, and betrayed. Now, finally, someone had stepped into her chaos and stopped the hand that was crushing her world. The private care wing doors loomed ahead, promising not just privacy, but a temporary heaven, a space where she could process, plan, and regain her strength. She felt the tension in her shoulders ease fractionally as Alistair guided her toward safety, a shield against the storm Sterling represented. Even the staff moved with precision, understanding the delicate nature of the situation. They created space, allowed them passage, and the air seemed charged with anticipation, curiosity, and quiet relief. As they reached the threshold of the private care area, Sierra allowed herself a moment to breathe, feeling a combination of exhaustion, adrenaline, and something she hadn't felt in months: hope. Alistair's eyes met hers again, dark, steady, and commanding. He didn't need to speak to convey the promise. You are safe. You are valued. No one will hurt you while I am here. Sierra's chest tightened, not with fear, but with the realization that the story she had been living, the betrayal, the humiliation, the manipulation, was finally shifting. She wasn't powerless, not anymore. Sterling remained in the lobby, arms crossed, watching, blue eyes narrowed in disbelief. He had underestimated her resilience, and more importantly, he had underestimated the force that had entered her life at precisely the right moment. The scattered fragments of papers on the marble floor seemed to mock him silently, a visual representation of the empire he thought he controlled beginning to crumble around him. Sierra stepped fully into the private care wing, still supported by Alistair's steady hand. Her thoughts were racing, mapping possibilities, thinking of strategies, considering how she would protect herself and the child growing inside her. The hum of the medical equipment, the quiet efficiency of the nurses, and the soft lighting contrasted sharply with the chaos she had just left. It was a world built on logic, care, and professionalism, unlike the theater of deception she had endured for months. Her fingers rested protectively over her belly, feeling the tiny, stubborn movements of life, as though it were reinforcing her determination. Alistair's presence remained beside her, a silent, unyielding pillar of strength. She didn't need words, she needed assurance, and in the depth of his gaze, she found it. Sterling's absence from the private care wing was almost physical, an empty threat that no longer held power over her. She had survived his cruelty, and now she had a shield she hadn't known existed. The staff moved seamlessly around them, aware that this was no ordinary moment. Sierra's reputation, her integrity, and her future were all hanging in the balance. She allowed herself a small breath, realizing that her story was shifting. No longer a tale of manipulation and helplessness. It was now a narrative of strength, protection, and the beginning of justice. As Sierra sank into the private care suit chair, still trembling, but steadied by Alistair's presence, a quiet chime from the hospital intercom echoed. Duckerthorn. Urgent matter in the boardroom regarding Mr. Whitmore's family assets. Sierra's eyes widened. Sterling's world was larger, more dangerous than she realized. And the battle she thought was just beginning in the lobby was about to expand far beyond anything she had imagined. By the time the first light of dawn seeped into the private care suit, the world outside seemed almost peaceful, though Sierra's mind was anything but. The echoes of Sterling's laughter and the chaos of the hospital lobby lingered in her ears, a haunting reminder of the betrayal she had endured just hours ago. She sipped the lukewarm hospital colistaire, had insisted on bringing her, its bitter aroma grounding her in the present, a small tether to reality. Marcus Hale, Thorne Medical's legal bulldog, didn't waste a moment. Even at this early hour, he had uncovered everything. He strode into the suite, files in hand, his expression sharp and precise, like a predator circling the truth. Fake efficient, he said briskly, tapping a folder. Fraud, emotional manipulation, breach of conduct clauses in Whitmore family trust funds. Everything's on paper, airtight. Sierra's breath hitched. She leaned against the back of the chair, hands folded over her belly instinctively. The magnitude of the plan Sterling had orchestrated, the meticulous deception, and the legal fallout were colliding inside her like a storm. Before she could speak, a new presence filled the room. Vivian Thorne, a striking woman in her 60s with steel, grey hair and a commanding presence, swept into the suit. She was Alistair's aunt, a long-time board member of the hospital network, and someone whose reputation alone could silence a room. Her eyes scanned Sierra like a protective hawk. "She deserves protection," Vivian said, her voice firm, unyielding. Alistair nodded slightly, acknowledging the weight of Vivian's words. "She deserves justice," he said quietly, the same steady tone that had frozen Sterling in the lobby hours before. Sierra's chest tightened at the sincerity and resolve in his voice. Wrapped in thick blankets, Sierra tried to process it all, sipping her coffee and feeling the warmth seep into her frozen fingers. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and paper, but somehow it felt safer than the lobby she had left behind. Her eyes followed Alistair as he moved with calculated calm toward the small table in the corner. "You didn't have to marry me," she whispered, voice hoarse, almost ashamed at the vulnerability she was allowing herself. "I didn't," he replied quietly, glancing at her with a depth that made her stomach flutter. There was no arrogance, no playfulness, just a raw honesty she hadn't encountered in anyone before. She frowned, uncertainty and caution coiling together. "Then why?" Alistair slid a stack of paperwork across the table toward her. His hand lingered on the top sheet, a silent invitation. "We're signed an emergency civil union. Temporary. Your choice what happens next." Sierra's fingers brushed the paper, hesitant. The words on the forms felt heavier than any diamond Sterling had ever pressed into her palm. She could feel the gravity of what she was being asked to accept. The legal framework that could secure her future and the life growing inside her. Her throat tightened, and she swallowed against the lump of disbelief and emotion that had lodged there. "You barely know me," she said softly, eyes lifted to meet his. "I know you work doubles for kids who weren't yours." Alistair replied, voice steady, a hint of admiration threading through the calm. "That's enough to start." Sierra blinked, stunned. The simplicity of the statement contrasted violently with the storm of deceit she had endured at Sterling's hands. Someone had seen her value, her humanity, her selflessness, and it had mattered. Not money, not appearances, not social games. Marcus Hale moved behind Alistair, arranging the documents in neat stacks, prepared to walk through the legal steps. The precision of his movements calmed her in a way that surprised her. For the first time in weeks, she felt as though someone, not Sterling, not chance, was looking out for her, defending her rights and dignity. Vivian Thorne moved closer, placing a hand lightly on Sierra's shoulder. "Alistair isn't just protecting you," she said softly, eyes sharp and calculating. "He's making sure nothing from that man, Sterling, can touch you or the child. Every loophole has been addressed. Every clause has been considered. He won't let you be exploited again." Sierra swallowed hard, overwhelmed, but also strangely empowered. The morning light warmed the room as though the sun itself were endorsing this shift of power, this reclamation of control over her life. Alistair's gaze met hers again, unwavering, almost daring her to doubt the sincerity behind his actions. "I don't need to know every detail of your life," he said. I don't need to understand everything you've been through. I need to know your heart, that you care, that you fight. That's enough. Her eyes brimmed with tears, tears of relief, tears of gratitude, and a spark of trust she hadn't allowed herself in years. For the first time, she felt safe enough to breathe, to let the adrenaline and fear begin to drain, leaving only clarity and resolve. Marcus cleared his throat, pulling her attention back to the paperwork. "We can finalize this as soon as you're ready, Ms. Vance. Everything has been prepared to protect both you and the child."
You're in control here.
Sierra's fingers hovered over the pen. She thought of Sterling, the envelope, the humiliation in the lobby. She thought of Alistair, of Vivian, of the unseen networks of support that now surrounded her. The contrast was sharp, almost painful in its clarity. Alistair remained silent, letting her decide. He didn't push, didn't coerce, didn't demand. The quiet patience he offered was a stark contrast to Sterling's chaos, a reminder that power didn't always need intimidation. It could be wielded with precision, respect, and calculated care. Sierra exhaled slowly, the lump in her throat easing just slightly. Her hand pressed against the papers, fingers brushing the pen. The life within her shifted slightly, a tiny kick, reminding her why she couldn't falter, why she couldn't back down, why she had to reclaim control of her story. Vivian stepped back, allowing the moment to unfold naturally, confident that Sierra's strength would guide her choices. Marcus watched, ready to implement whatever Sierra decided, the legal machinery prepared and precise, a silent testament to how thorough protection could be when it was executed with expertise. The air in the room felt charged, expectant like the quiet before a storm, or the moment just before the sun fully rises. Every detail, every flicker of expression, every subtle movement carried weight, significance, consequence. Sierra's mind raced, connecting the legal strategy with the emotional reality. She realized that Sterling's deception had been vast, but it had not accounted for people like Alistair, Marcus, or Vivian. It had not accounted for her own courage and determination. Alistair leaned slightly forward, voice quiet but firm. "This isn't about me. It's about ensuring that what's yours is protected, that the life you're carrying is safe, that no one else can manipulate it. That's why we do this now." Sierra nodded slowly, her resolve hardening with each passing second. The papers were more than documents. They were shields, safeguards, the legal backbone for reclaiming her life. The morning light fell across the stack, illuminating the fine print, the meticulous attention to detail. Every clause, every line, was designed to prevent the kind of cruelty Sterling had inflicted. Sierra's hand closed over the pen, knuckles whitening. She looked at Alistair again, gratitude and determination mingling in her gaze. I trust you," she whispered, the words both tentative and powerful. Alistair's expression softened, but his focus never wavered. "Then we start here, together." The sound of the clock ticking on the wall seemed louder in the quiet of the suite. Every tick a reminder that time was moving forward, that decisions had consequences, that justice was a living, breathing process waiting to be activated. As Sierra prepared to sign the emergency civil union paperwork, a secure message pinged on Alistair's tablet. The words made him pause, eyes narrowing sharply. Mesefa. Whitmore is moving assets internationally. Immediate legal action required. Sierra's heart sank. Sterling wasn't finished. And this fight was about to spill far beyond the walls of the hospital. Sterling's empire of entitlement began to crumble before he could fully comprehend it. Accounts froze, as if the world itself had decided he could no longer move freely. Headlines splashed across financial sites and social media like wildfire, announcing the chaos of a trust fund scandal and a scandalous lawsuit. Sponsors, once eager to attach their names to his image, vanished almost overnight, leaving empty logos where influence had once thrived. The air of invincibility Sterling had worn like armor dissolved, replaced by whispers, shock, and the gleam of opportunity for those he had wronged. Meanwhile, in the quiet cocoon of Alistair's private care wing, a very different world unfolded. The sterile beeps and soft hums of hospital equipment became a backdrop for moments that were quiet, intimate, and fiercely real. Alistair brought Sierra soup, careful to make it the kind she could eat even with her lingering nausea. The aroma of homemade broth filled the small room, a comfort more powerful than any luxury Sterling had ever thrown at her. He learned her tea order, the exact way she liked it steeped, the sugar and milk balanced just so. He remembered these small details, as if committing them to memory was as important as any medical protocol he had followed in his life. These tiny acts of care became threads that slowly wove them closer together. Ultrasounds became rituals. Sierra sat in the chair, the baby's tiny form appearing on the screen, a flickering heartbeat strong and steady. Alistair gripped the arm of the chair so tightly it left impressions in his skin, knuckles whitening, his usually composed expression betraying surprise and awe each time the image appeared. "I'm not good at this," he admitted quietly one afternoon, voice low and unpracticed, the vulnerability foreign on his usual stoic features. Sierra smiled faintly, warmth softening her features. "Me either," she whispered, the words carrying both confession and understanding. They were two people unaccustomed to the messy reality of connection, yet forging it nonetheless, each moment layering trust and tenderness like mortar between bricks. He kissed her knuckles one evening, gentle and careful, as if they were priceless relics. Unpracticed, real, unassuming, but enough to make her breath catch in ways that Sterling never could. It was in this quiet intimacy that Sierra began to feel a sense of belonging, a safety she hadn't realized she had craved. Months passed. The baby kicked relentlessly, and each movement was met with wide-eyed fascination from Alistair, who laughed as though each surprise were a gift meant only for him. Sierra watched him, heart-warming, seeing a side of a man known for control and precision now utterly human in private. Every night, their small apartment in the hospital wing became a sanctuary. Alistair, usually commanding and reserved, would talk softly about trivial things, the weather, a patient's recovery, the taste of coffee. Sierra would listen, laughing at his careful observations, noting the cracks in his composure that made him endearing. Real and accessible in a way she hadn't expected. One night, after the baby had been restless and the ultrasound images replayed in her mind, Sierra whispered softly, uncertain and vulnerable, "Are we pretending?" Her voice carried the fear of those who had been deceived, abandoned, or misled. She needed assurance that this reality was true, that her safety, her heart, and her future weren't merely illusions. Alistair met her eyes, steady, unwavering. His expression was calm, deliberate, and terrifying in its intensity, yet reassuring all at once. "No," he said, a single word that resonated like a vow. No pretense, no manipulation, no hidden agenda. Just truth. Just protection. Just the beginning of something neither of them had expected, but both desperately needed. Days blurred into weeks. Alistair and Sierra navigated prenatal appointments together, sitting side by side in waiting rooms, sharing quiet conversations about the future. He learned to anticipate her needs, whether adjusting the pillow behind her back or holding her hand through contractions in simulated labor exercises. These moments, though small, built layers of trust stronger than any contract Sterling had ever written. In private, they were unguarded. Laughter became frequent, filling spaces that had once echoed with tension or silence. Alistair laughed at the smallest kicks, murmuring encouragement to the baby, teasing Sierra gently when she winced or groaned from nausea. Their home within the hospital felt like a sanctuary, protected from the outside chaos that Sterling had left behind. They shared meals, late-night conversations, and moments of quiet reflection. Sierra taught Alistair patience in ways the hospital walls hadn't, and he offered her protection in forms both tangible and invisible. The dichotomy between their public and private selves was stark. In private, vulnerability was not weakness. It was a bridge between two hearts seeking stability in a storm of previous betrayals. Alistair, untrained in matters of love and domestic life, adapted slowly. He made mistakes, misstepped, and apologized with sincerity that melted the remaining walls Sierra held around her heart. Each correction, each act of care, was a demonstration of investment, of authenticity, of a life rebuilt with intention rather than coercion. Sierra began to see Sterling not as a threat looming over her, but as a shadow of the past. The real world of danger remained: legal battles, media scrutiny, the faint threat of revenge. But inside these walls, with Alistair beside her, Sierra discovered a rhythm, a normalcy that was once unimaginable. They decorated a small corner with baby items, choosing colors and fabrics together. Every decision was collaborative, intentional. Alistair listened when Sierra expressed preferences, validating her instincts with quiet admiration. The act of choosing tiny items, planning small futures, anchored Sierra in the tangible reality of her autonomy and growing family. Late evenings were filled with gentle touches, whispered reassurances, and the occasional playful argument over tea strength or blanket folds. These domestic moments became sacred rituals, quiet affirmations that trust could exist without deceit, love could exist without pretense, and safety could feel like home. Even Alistair's habitual intensity softened in these private hours. He would sometimes pause mid-sentence, watching Sierra rest her hand on her belly, listening to her breath, and simply smile at the life forming in front of him. He admitted, quietly, almost to himself, that he had underestimated the depth of attachment such moments could cultivate. The hospital corridors outside continued their frantic pace, patients and staff moving through lives intertwined with urgency and stress. Yet, in their sanctuary, time slowed, and the outside world's chaos became a distant hum. The contrast reinforced the reality that Sierra and Alistair were building something uniquely theirs, a fortress of care, intimacy, and mutual respect. Even as Sterling's actions continued to ripple outward, legal maneuvers, media speculation, trust fund complications, the sanctuary they had created became an unassailable haven. Sierra could see the difference between empty gestures and authentic care. Alistair's unpracticed tenderness, the way he adjusted pillows, remembered meals, laughed at small things, this was real. This was trust. This was love forming in private, away from the eyes that would seek to exploit or manipulate. Alistair's presence reminded her that protection could be gentle, that power could be wielded responsibly, and that vulnerability could coexist with strength. Each day, Sierra felt her confidence rebuild, piece by piece, stitched together by small gestures, thoughtful actions, and moments of shared laughter. She began to imagine a future without fear, a future where the baby would grow knowing their parents' hearts were aligned, their intentions true. Each kick, each tiny movement, was a reaffirmation of life, hope, and the tangible reality of a love forged in adversity. Their laughter often startled them, spontaneous and genuine, filling spaces that had once echoed only with tension or uncertainty. It became the soundtrack of their mornings, afternoons and evenings. With Alistair, even the mundane small talk, watching clouds drift past the hospital windows, felt extraordinary. A quiet rebellion against the world Sterling had tried to dominate. One evening, as Sierra rested with her hand on her belly and Alistair pored over hospital files, a single, urgent text appeared on his tablet. Sterling Whitmore has hired a private investigator. He's tracking you both. Immediate discretion required. Sierra's pulse raced. Even in the sanctuary they had built, danger from the past was not finished, and the shadows of Sterling's obsession were closing in faster than either of them had anticipated. The morning air in the hospital lobby was crisp, carrying a faint scent of rain from the previous night. 1 year had passed, and the corridors that had once witnessed humiliation and heartbreak now hummed with a different energy. Sierra Vance stepped through the sliding glass doors with purpose. Her tailored navy suit hugged her form with professional elegance, a symbol not just of status, but of self-possession earned through fire and perseverance. Her board badge caught the light, glinting like a small beacon. Head of Nursing. The weight of the title was heavy but deserved. a testament to every sleepless shift, every patient saved, and every boundary she had fought to reclaim. Alistair Thorne waited near the main entrance, holding a baby carrier with ease that belied his broad shoulders. His gaze lifted when he saw her, eyes softening in that quiet, commanding way that had made her heart trust him completely. Their connection, once forged in chaos and protection, had deepened into a partnership grounded in mutual respect, love, and shared purpose. He didn't need words. Sierra's smile, fleeting but radiant, conveyed enough. The lobby buzzed around them, yet time seemed to momentarily stretch as the world adjusted to the image of their family. Patients, nurses, and visitors alike paused to watch, their story now whispered in hallways, a cautionary tale of betrayal transformed into triumph. It was the kind of moment Sterling had never understood. Power wielded without cruelty, authority paired with humanity, and victory measured in love rather than arrogance. And then Sterling appeared, a thin figure at the entrance, arguing with security, his once pristine tailored suits replaced with a wrinkled coat that hung loosely on his frame. No chaffier, no entourage, no gold cufflinks sparkling as he laughed his way through life. Just a man diminished by his own choices, standing in a space where he had once believed himself untouchable. His blue eyes, once artificial in their arrogance, flicked toward Sierra, recognition flashing briefly, but so did disbelief, shame, and a flicker of desperation. Sierra didn't slow. She didn't glance. She didn't remember him enough to feel hatred. There was no need. His power, his charm, his cruelty, all of it had evaporated into the past. The woman who had been humiliated, betrayed, and threatened had grown into someone untouchable, not through wealth, but through dignity, resilience, and self-respect. She bent gently to her son, lifting the carrier to her chest for a brief, tender kiss on his forehead. The small life, alive and vibrant, was the purest proof of everything she had endured and survived. It was a quiet victory, a life untarnished by Sterling's deception, nurtured by love and integrity. Alistair's hand found hers, fingers interlacing in the familiar warmth that had come to define safety and partnership. His gaze met hers, steady, unyielding, full of the unspoken promises made in hospital corridors, in quiet ultrasounds, in late, night conversations filled with laughter and vulnerability. Together, they were a fortress, unshaken by external forces, a family bonded by choice, not circumstance. Sterling opened his mouth, perhaps to plead, perhaps to demand, perhaps to reclaim, even a fragment of the past he had lost. But Sierra didn't stop. She didn't look at him. She didn't acknowledge him beyond the faint awareness that the man who had caused so much pain was now inconsequential. The hospital buzzed around them, the energy of life flowing uninterrupted. Nurses, doctors, and staff moved through the halls with purpose, but those who knew the story paused just long enough to witness the image. Sierra, glowing with confidence, holding her child, walking hand in hand with the man who had protected her, guided her, and loved her. Alistair adjusted the baby, carrier careful to keep their son comfortable, and offered a small, proud smile to Ciara. She responded with a tilt of her head, a quiet acknowledgement of the journey. They had survived together. Each step they took down the corridor echoed with triumph. No pomp, no ostentation, just the quiet certainty of lives reclaimed and rebuilt. Sterling's presence became smaller with every step they took. The man who had once believed himself untouchable now seemed fragile, diminished by the very world he had attempted to control. His wrinkled coat, his solitary stance, his lack of entourage, they were all symbols of his downfall, an empire crumbled by arrogance and deceit, contrasted sharply against the strength of Ciara's integrity and the quiet power of love and justice. They paused at the nurse's station, Ciara adjusting her jacket, checking on her staff with a calm authority that radiated competence and warmth. Her team looked up, respect and admiration evident in every glance. This was her domain now, not because of wealth, but because of the strength she had cultivated through years of sacrifice, heartache, and unyielding dedication. Alistair stood beside her, hand never leaving hers, a silent statement to the worldly. She was protected, supported, and cherished. He didn't need to speak, but the quiet confidence in his stance conveyed a lifetime of promises fulfilled and battles won. Ciara's son stirred in the carrier, tiny fingers curling around her blouse. She bent slightly, whispering softly, a sound so private it was for no one but him. "You are safe," she murmured, voice steady. "We are safe." Alistair's hand rose to brush a strand of hair from her face. "Forever," he said. The single word weighted with promise, commitment, and love. The hospital's hustle continued around them, the world moving as it always had. But for Ciara, Alistair, and their son, the storm of the past had settled. No more humiliation, no more manipulation, no more shadows looming from a man like Sterling. Theirs was a life reclaimed, strengthened by adversity, and built on trust, respect, and unwavering care. Ciara's steps were deliberate, measured, and confident. Every footfall echoed authority, every glance carried warmth, every breath spoke of victory, not over money or status, but over fear, betrayal, and the erosion of self-worth. Alistair and Ciara navigated the corridors like seasoned partners, their bond palpable to anyone who noticed. There was no need for announcements, no need for fanfare. The quiet dignity of their love, their family, and their reclaimed life spoke louder than any public declaration ever could. Sterling lingered a few steps behind, trying to grasp at the vestiges of a world he no longer controlled. He opened his mouth again, but the sound died in the air. No one paid attention. The man who had once commanded rooms, manipulated hearts, and flaunted wealth now found himself invisible, irrelevant, and alone. Ciara and Alistair approached the hospital elevator. She adjusted the baby carrier, feeling the tiny heartbeat against her chest. Life, love, and strength were intertwined in ways Sterling had never imagined possible. The elevator doors closed slowly, marking the boundary between past and future. The hospital lobby, once the stage of betrayal and humiliation, became the backdrop of triumph, recovery, and enduring love. Sierra took a deep breath, letting the weight of the year wash over her. The betrayals, the hardships, the victories, and the quiet moments of care that had stitched together her new reality. She felt whole, empowered, and undeniably in control. Alistair's hand tightened around hers. Their eyes met, a shared understanding passing silently between them. Nothing could touch what they had built together. The love, the family, the reclaimed dignity, it was unshakable. As the elevator doors fully closed, Sierra kissed her son's forehead once more, whispering words that were for him, for herself, and for the life she had fought to protect. This is just the beginning. Every challenge Sterling had posed, every attempt to control or humiliate, had been overcome. The power had shifted irreversibly. Sierra had transformed from a woman haunted by betrayal into a leader, a mother, a wife, and a force of resilience. Alistair watched her closely, pride and love softening his usually stern features. Together, they were more than a family. They were a testament to endurance, integrity, and the triumph of authenticity over deception. They moved into the elevator, ascending toward the floors they now commanded, not just in title, but in purpose. Every step forward was deliberate, every heartbeat a rhythm of victory. Sierra had not just survived. She had conquered the world Sterling had tried to control. The hospital lights reflected softly off her badge, the glint a reminder that authority earned through merit and courage outshines any inheritance or fortune. Sterling's figure blurred in the background as the doors shut completely, the past literally and figuratively closing behind them. The quiet of the elevator contrasted the chaos that had once ruled her life. Sierra exhaled, a deep, steady breath that spoke of release, triumph, and promise. Alistair's gaze never left hers. There was no need for grand gestures. Every look, every touch, every shared breath conveyed unshakable trust and commitment. Sierra's son wriggled, tiny fingers brushing her collarbone. She smiled, the purest, most contented expression she had ever worn. For the first time in her life, she felt entirely aligned with her path, her family, and her own heart. Alistair adjusted the carrier, his presence calm and steady, his love unmistakable. The moment was intimate, quiet, and powerful proof that a life built on authenticity could withstand any storm. They reached their floor. Doors opened. They stepped out together, fully present, fully whole. Sierra's confidence radiated, her son secure, and Alistair unwavering at her side. No whispers, no judgments, no shadows could penetrate this new reality. This was the life they had fought for and earned. Sterling's name faded into the background, meaningless now, a relic of a chapter that had ended. Sierra's steps were steady, deliberate, and commanding. Each step was a statement. I am here, I am strong, I am free. She glanced at Alistair, his hand on her back, guiding, supporting, loving. She realized fully that the battles they had endured had forged not only a family, but a foundation of trust, respect, and unshakable love. The elevator doors closed behind them, once again as they entered the nursery. The space that would witness the first cries, the first laughter, and countless firsts for their son. Sierra exhaled, eyes soft but fierce. She had walked through fire, betrayal, and fear, and emerged unbroken, empowered, and radiant. Alistair leaned close, whispering in her ear, a quiet affirmation of everything they had overcome. This is ours. Nothing can touch it. Sierra smiled, the kind of smile that comes from knowing the past no longer has power, and the future is theirs to shape. They settled into the nursery together, the baby stirring lightly, and Sierra felt the quiet pulse of life, love, and justice vibrating in every corner of the room. It was over. Sterling was gone. His attempts to harm or control were nothing but echoes. Sierra, Alistair, and their son existed in a world where honesty, care, and resilience ruled. A world finally fitting her, finally hers. As Sierra rocked her baby to sleep, she whispered softly, almost to herself, "No one will ever make us small again." The camera of life pulled back. Outside, the city moved, oblivious to the personal triumph within the hospital walls. But inside, a family had claimed their victory, and nothing could ever take it away. The story ended not with revenge, but with peace, power, and love. Sierra had finally stepped fully into her life, unshakable, radiant, and free.